details, but yeah, fundamentally, yes. Cheers, Redstone. See, you could have asked it earlier anyway. Matt, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I guess this is a question for CJ or kind of probably a basic artillery question, but the difference between the Excalibur round and the German-made 155 Smart munition. I also saw that there was one. I'm not sure if it's an active use in theater, but the 155 bonus round. And then that's my question.
And maybe you can include Volcano in that as well.
Sorry about that.
I was just telling CJ there's a fourth one to maybe include in the answer as well.
Oh, okay, cool, great.
You'll have to ask Thomas Steiner when he comes back on, hopefully Sunday, about the Volcano round, because it's not one I've used or really know too much about. In terms of the Excalibur round, it's, of course, GPS guided, so it's extremely precise on a static target. It's hard to really find a better weapon system in that regard. I mean, it has a lot of similarities and overlap with a Mike 31 Alpha 1 from the HIMARS, in terms of at least how it's employed. In terms of the smart and bonus rounds, this is something that the U.S., had worked with, different Scandinavian countries and others to really start, basically making mainstream across the Army writ large in 2018, 2019. And of course, they function differently because they are, they're heat/IR guided. So they're looking for engines that are turned on vehicles. And so they have, they obviously explode in the air, and then they release basically guided parachutes down, which go towards warmth. And at that point in time, they explode again with an EFP or explosively formed penetrator, kind of like how a javelin works, is my understanding. And so what that means is you get something that's very good for moving targets and also very good for armor. I actually don't know if there's a difference technically between smart and bonus. Bonus being the ones that the U.S. currently has in inventory, and the smart being the ones that I believe Germany makes. But functionally, at the end of the day, they achieve the same result, which I think is the important thing.
And PGKs, CJ, Excalibur on the discount.
Yes, PGKs. I think they've been given, because whenever the U.S. says that they've given, precision guided munitions for 155, it could mean any of those options. But the PGK kits are so important. So basically, you take a dumb round, an unguided round, and you snap on a special fuse in the top that has fins on it, and it becomes guided at that point. So you basically, the round itself costs about $800. The PGK kit costs about $10,000. And now you get a level of accuracy that's 10 times better, or precision that's 10 times better. And so what you can do is you can use this round and reasonably hit an artillery piece or a vehicle and actually destroy it, as opposed to unguided artillery where you got to fire a ton of rounds to do it. And for cost comparison, the PGK kit is about $10,000, whereas Excal will run you about $100,000 to $140,000 depending. So definitely a great option that I believe has been given and should be given more of.
It just makes such sense, right? When you have volume of artillery being fired, but at the same time, you want this real precision advantage. Nale, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, CJ. Do you want to talk about GLONASS jamming?
I mean, you really would want to get John up for that because, basically all I can tell you about GLONASS is it's a crappier version of GPS. But I can try my best real quick.
Okay, well, referring actually to what Thomas Steiner said in his talk about the GLONASS system, that you can jam it or spoof it, and if you try to hit a factory, you will, because it's a huge target, and if you try to hit a tank, you can't because it's too small. So between all this, how can they hit a substation then?
Well, substation's pretty big, and they get to use GPS.
I mean, all I would
the
say
Russians use GPS.
There's two things to consider. One, the volume that they fire, right? If they launch 50 cruise missiles in a day or 50 drones in a day, even if they're going to be 100 meters off, if you launch four of them at a target and you only need to be within 25 meters, now you've reached the probability that you're probably going to hit. The other thing to consider, and this is not something I'm familiar in, is, if you were to compare GPS and GLONASS together as guided systems, you would obviously say GPS is superior, but where there's really a bigger gap probably is in terms of how that guidance system actually translates to the rocketry and to the telemetry and towards all those other components of guidance for how it gets there. So if you had, a US rocket that was using GLONASS, but you could design the rocket better, it probably would be much more accurate. So what I really would want to know, for example, is how the missiles and just different systems in general differ in terms of flight control and specifically terminal guidance, which is how they end up impacting the target, which I think is there's probably an even bigger difference than just the guidance source alone.
Okay. And when is Thomas Steiner coming on again? Does anyone know?
Hopefully this Sunday, in the evening in Europe and midday in America. That is what we're hoping for here for part 4. And Antti, I'm sorry, it's funny. His podcast is popular, and the number 1 podcast right now for the MriyaReport are 3 Thomas Steiner ones. And I believe within the next day or so, Antti will be the number 2 person on the MriyaReport. So we're so happy that it's someone that's such a regular contributor and listener.
Yeah, go Antti. Thank you.
Nalle, I just want to tell you one little thing before you go to Antti. Your call sign is very popular among female Finnish listeners.
My call sign is popular.
Yes.
What does that mean?
They like it. That's Nalle. They like that. You can explain what it means. I won't, but maybe Antti will.
Okay, I'll explain it quickly if I may.
Please.
Nalle is teddy bear in Finnish and Swedish. So there you go.
There we go. Now everybody knows. But I got like 4 different messages over the last few days. Like, oh, that's so cute. Anyway, Antti, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Doman. Hey, CJ. How are you guys doing?
We're doing pretty good. I mean, I can
We're
speak
doing
for
great.
myself. I think CJ's already.
Excellent. So I just noticed that with the Hammer 22 exercise ongoing in Finland, there is a even an armored element from the 1st Cavalry Division from the States participating with our own armored brigade, and there was a really nice shot of a Abrams crossing over a bridge element in a Finnish forest, and I think that's one of the prettiest sights I've seen in a long time. Wouldn't you agree, CJ? Did I just Twitter pox CJ?
No, he's coming back. He's coming back. It just takes a second. I looked away for 5 seconds, and in those 5 seconds, CJ vanished. But he's back, almost.
Yes, I mean,
Almost.
Okay.
I hope it never comes to Abrams in Finland, but if it did, it would be a beautiful sight, I would say.
Yeah. So I think you've been bombarded with artillery questions, so I think I need to pile on so I don't lose my reputation. So do you think that we've reached the point since for maybe a couple of months now that in the sectors where Ukrainian defense forces require it, they have actually achieved artillery superiority over the battlefield?
Definitely, especially in Kherson, the ability to control the bridge crossings with HIMARS and having more systems. And then in areas like Zaporizhia, where, yes, Russia can bring up S-300s and use them to hit infrastructure, but they can't really mass forces without being destroyed. Probably the only area where they don't have a full-on artillery supremacy is Donetsk specifically. And it's hard, right? The terrain is mountainous, more mountainous than other places. There's a lot of rivers. There's a lot of cities. It ends up being an area that's not really ideal for artillery in the way that Ukraine probably wants to. And so this is an area to definitely focus on where they need more precision guided munitions to make a difference. But I would say and more times than not, they definitely do.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
All right, thank you, CJ. And Antti, we weren't kidding. Your When There Were podcast gets like, I don't know, 100 listens a day or something. Really well done. Name on the trophy. You're up next. And
Thank you,
we
John.
just lost
Yeah.
CJ, by the way, just for information. So you're stuck with me and Antti and others.
Oh, I just wanted to ask CJ to run through what he's seen HIMARS firing recently. I tagged him in a tweet that he retweeted, which was HIMARS shooting out some candy for some kids. But if we've lost CJ, but while I got the opportunity, Antti, I listened to every word of your piece live, and it was great. So thank you for your contribution there.
I want to say, name on the trophy. Oh no, sorry, Antti, you go ahead first, and then I can talk about that.
Yeah, just thank you. Thanks for that.
This is what he gets from a Finn. Name on the trophy. I was disappointed. I was disappointed with the range exhibited by that, candy launching HIMARS yesterday on Halloween. Fort, I forget which one. If this is almost a misuse of equipment, right? They already launched it right in front of it. Could have done it from at least like across the building or something. Come on.
A modification I may suggest. So rather than those like anti-tank mines, maybe we should do like bottles of vodka on little parachutes, and then sort of lay waste to the ground in front with that, and then the Ukrainians can just roll up to a bunch of sleeping Russians. But anyway, enough for the levity. Keep going, guys. Thanks for the space.
Thank you very much. Name on the trophy. Alan, welcome back.
Hello. I wanted to ask CJ about something. I wanted to ask him if he prefers the CV90s over the Archer, as we are in the fog of war of the Swedish government's decision-making process. But I guess he just jumped out of an airplane, so yeah.
Yeah, this is a problem with these paratroopers. The drop of a hat. Did they wear a hat? They wouldn't wear a hat when they're about to go jumping,
But
right?
my question is, do they jump out of an airplane with this 105 millimeter artillery gun and the ammunition as well, all strapped to their backpack?
Yeah, so no, they're strapped to the artillery, right? That's the idea. No, I don't know. I don't know if this airborne artillery actually means that there's parachutes on the guns, or it's like the helicopter delivery type artillery that gets parachute. I don't know. I'm really curious now. Now we have to wait.
Because I've seen like crazy equipment being thrown out of C-130s,
but like low flying, right, on the pallets and stuff.
Yeah,
not from 6,000 feet or something.
Yeah, but
well, there you go.
I don't think because it's quite of a heavy thump that those vehicles get when they land, and I don't think an artillery piece would like that a lot, especially the ammunition.
That's a good point as well. I don't know. I think there's some sort of suspension on the pallets. I don't know. But I can answer your question from my perspective. Maybe Antti can as well. So I'm thinking I would much rather see the CV90s than Archers, because Archers are fantastic. It would be extra artillery tubes for Ukraine, make a big difference, right? But at the same time, CV90s would be that. Well, not straw that breaks the camel's back, but you know what I mean. There would be a precedent. They would be setting an actual precedent, and they would be making an actual difference, because there would be other things that might then be actually sent that wouldn't have been sent previously or otherwise. And I think that makes a lot of a difference. It would open the gates for all manner of other things, especially IFVs, but also maybe somebody else is like, yeah, okay, fine, CV90 is a very good piece of kit, and you can explain to people, maybe Alan, how good a piece of kit CV90 is. I think just because of that, I'd rather have 100 CV90s than a dozen Archers. I don't know. Ellen, what do you think?
Yeah, I really hope that they'll break this Schultzing and send the CV90s, because for me it's absolutely appalling to see, first of all, the Ukrainians fighting along with the pickup trucks and M113, which today I want to say that is not a infantry fighting vehicle or an APC at all. It's a tin box. It's a target practice. It's a good thing for the rare lines as a command wagon or an ambulance or whatever. But even with Russian weapons, it's horrible. Let's say that you're inside that one M130 wagon and they shoot you with 20mm gun, or even with a large caliber sniper rifle with armor penetrating bullets. When that penetrates the thin armor of the M113, everything is just gonna be like hot glowing metal shrapnel flying all over inside that thing. Whilst the CV90 it can take a punch, and it's fast, and that's the main thing. It's really fast and nimble, low profile. It's hard to see. I've heard that it can even bounce on a certain angle, projectiles from a tank. But most of all, the sensors and the sensor array and the 40mm cannon, it punches really hard, and it can shoot from a really significant distance and protect and give really heavy fire support to the advancing soldiers. And it would make a difference. It would protect soldiers not only with the armor, but also with the firepower, fire support power, and the sensors, which permits the units operating it to relay the information about what movements of troops or vehicles are ahead of the infantry unit moving with the CV90s, and lay down a hell of a lot of fire, and that protects everyone around it. The Archer can't do any of that, but it's a really cool artillery piece. So, yeah.
So it's a very good infantry fighting vehicle. It's not the best in the world, but it's a very good one, right? It can have how many infanteers fit in the back of it as well? 6, 7, something like that?
I think 8.
8, okay, right. And it has a big gun on it. It has tracks. It's fairly maneuverable. It's well armored. It has as big a gun as any IFV, I think, on it. So that sort of thing really makes a difference. It's a different capability, and that matters possibly a lot more than 12 more. Anyway, Antti, I'm sure you have stuff to add in the CV90s.
No, I just I would challenge the premise of the question. Why would we need to choose? Ukraine needs both. So I hope Ukraine will receive both.
I concur wholeheartedly. All right. Thank you, Antti. I think we have Dave, then Nick, and then Aaron. Dave, go ahead.
Hey, Doman. I was wondering on the 40mm grenades that get dropped from the, like, I presume they get dropped from those little DJI drones, or somehow outfitted with those.
All sorts. There's like giant hexacopter, octocopter drones that have like 6 of those strapped to them, or maybe even more. So there's variety.
Do the IFVs or even like trucks or Humvees, do they offer any protection against those? And then just one other thing is those explosive armor things. How do those work? And are they possible to be outfitted on something other than a tank, or do they just blow right through it? Or that was my question.
Honestly, I don't know. I have no clue. Anybody want to pick that one up? Just speak up.
You would need to have some sort of armor behind that because it's a fairly large explosion. I saw that some crazy Russians fitted out a Kamaz truck with that thing, and yeah, that would be a death trap. You could just shoot that thing with a sniper rifle, and the whole truck would blow.
I see. And do the trucks offer, my first question, do the trucks or Humvees, do they offer any protection against those grenades that are dropped from the drones?
Depends which kind of grenade. If it's an armor-piercing grenade, then a truck with armor, it probably not. If it's a normal grenade, because they also drop plain hand grenades from these drones, then definitely Humvee or armored, any truck or car would definitely protect you from the shrapnels from a normal hand grenade. But the 40 millimeter armor penetrating ones, not so much. But the worst thing is if they get these mortar rounds dropped on them, because those are of a little bit heavier caliber and explosives.
Thank you, Alan. We got two former American servicemen here, Dave, to help you out on that as well. Charles and then Daryl. Charles, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, just about the explosive reactive armor, just to help the questioner sort of how it works. Most anti-armor weapons create something called an explosively formed projectile. So when it hits, it actually creates a molten or soft metal slug that is then, which is actually what penetrates the armor. And what those EFP blocks do is they disrupt the formation of that slug. So I did see the video or the picture of the one on the truck. That is a really, really stupid idea and totally pointless, because they do explode. But that's how they work. They explode to disrupt the formation of this slug that is actually the armor penetrating stuff. In terms of 40 millimeter grenades, yeah, I think it was Alan. I think he's right. It kind of depends on which one and which vehicle. Up armored Humvees, the top was not particularly armored. I don't know about the BMPs, what the top armor is. For a tank turret, 40 millimeter wouldn't do much. But I suspect most of them are anti-personnel 40 millimeter grenades. That's what most of them are. Which means they send out a bunch of shrapnel BBs around. So even Alan's right about the M113, but that would still stop that kind of thing. But maybe that helps a bit.
And Daryl? Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the 113. A lot of people are looking at the 113 as just light armored personnel carrier. But the one thing that makes the 113 even better is its capacity to carry like cargo. Where a lot of your infantry fighting vehicles, they are sole purpose. You can't put a pallet of anything on the inside. The one thing about the 113, it has a open cargo bay where you can just load pallets or a pallet or two of, say, food, bullets, fuel, water, fuel, because there are small bladders, small fuel tank bladders that you can put inside of these things on a pallet. It just slides right in, and now you have a tracked fuel tanker, so to speak. It only holds about 400, 500 gallons, I think it is, but it's enough. If you got equipment that's out of fuel, this thing can get a lot of different places and supply people. So let's not just think of the 113 as a single use type of piece of equipment. It has multiple roles that it can do besides just carrying troops. I know that's the main focus that everybody's looking for the Ukrainian army, but it does have these other capabilities that makes it an asset when you are in rough terrain and you have other tracked vehicles that need supplies and whatnot that the trucks and other wheel vehicles can't get to.
I agree, Daryl, but It's not an assault vehicle. That's what I meant.
No. I understand what you're saying. It is not something you want to go into a heavy, high caliber fight with. But I'm just saying, as far as the other things that it can do, that's one thing that everybody needs to look at when they talk about other vehicles by sending the 113. That 113 is as well besides, personnel.
Thank you, Dara. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Ellen. See, Dave. And Dave's question was answered so well, he just left. Okay, that's fair enough. Maybe he's busy with something. But thank you, gentlemen, for explaining all of that, because I wouldn't have been able to. Right, I think we have Nick, then Aaron, and then my friend Prince. Nick.
I put a tweet in the nest from President Macron, who he actually sent two tweets. The first of which I thought was kind of more obvious than the first one.
Was
so
the first in
one,
French?
No. He sent them both in French, and then he sent them both in English, and then French people connected and replied to the ones in English, going, "Why don't you say it in French?" So in the first one, he says, "As I confirmed this morning to President Zelensky, we are fully mobilized to increase our military support for Ukraine, particularly with regard to anti-air defenses." I don't know whether France has actually recently indicated that they'll send more anti-air stuff. I know the Western powers generally have been obviously placing an emphasis on that in the last week. More interesting, I think, is that he explicitly mentioned something that we were discussing, something I'm sure has been discussed many times, but something we were discussing on here when I was here, which is the the criterion. I think for anyone's view of this space is always going to be what happened when they were there. Ukraine's water supply and electricity infrastructure have suffered significant damage in Russian attacks. Action is needed before winter. We shall swiftly mobilize both the international community and the private sector. Now, there was a discussion here maybe a week or so ago, and Axel was here. I remember Axel said, I was talking about various companies that could do it, and Axel basically said, look, Siemens have got several thousand engineers sitting on their hands with nothing to do since Siemens left Russia. They could go and rebuild some of the electrical infrastructure. But yeah, with companies like Vinci and Saint-Gobain, and Alstom and Suez, France has got some pretty big companies that are pretty damn good at building infrastructure. So I found it interesting. I mean, obviously this is the tweet, the most sort of basic level of political intent, but it seems to suggest that perhaps at the next EU meeting of relevance, whenever that is, that there will be some push to actually get money and more to the point, contractors and trucks and concrete and tubes and wiring and all that kind of good stuff mobilized. And this is the highest level intervention on that topic that I have seen.
Thank you, Nick. I will briefly note that there were some suggestions in La Repubblica over the weekend that Italy and France jointly might be considering agreeing on delivering a SAMP-T, which is a very modern, very capable air defense system that was developed jointly between Italy and between Italy and France, whereby Italy would be providing the radars for it, and France would be providing the things that fly around and the things that they're stored in and launched from before they fly around. Missiles, I think they're called, and launchers. That
Meloni continues to surprise us.
I know. I am happy to eat all the words that I ever said about her. If she really pulls through with this, and that's fine. No worries, not on my end. That's for sure. As to the rest, yeah, great. That's exactly what is needed. That is exactly the sort of attitude that's needed. I think France was already included on that list of 12 countries, if I remember correctly. It was released at the end of yesterday by the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, I believe, that are supplying sort of electrical infrastructure. They're sort of, that list was mostly things that are really stopgap measures like generators, but nevertheless, it's good. And as you said, Nick, it's not just Germany that has a bunch of people who know how to install transformers. France as well, like Alstom, etc. Let's get them all going. I completely agree. Florian, I know you want to speak to this, but if it's okay by you, I just want to run through Aaron and Prince real quick before turning back to you, because I know that we're going to have a bigger discussion about it. Thank you so much, Florian. That's why I'm also keeping this short now, Nick, because we can turn to it with Florian in a little bit. Aaron.
Hey, thanks, Domin. Gosh, you've been here all day. You're a workhorse. I was wondering, do we have any more updates of what happened at the attack on the Black Sea Fleet, or are we still guessing?
No, I've seen nothing. Nobody's brought up anything, so I presume there is nothing.
So we have no idea of the Makarov or anything
Not
else.
really. Nope. My best guess is that the radars and the Makarov are buggered, and that there's been other damage to other things. That's probably my best. That is my best guess. Ships are there, just not very useful. Next.
That's Russian radar on dead.
Yeah, fair. I mean, could be anything really. I don't know. We'll see. When there is more, there is more. When there's more stuff, I will be very happy to talk about it more. That's it. Is there more, Aaron, or can we get to Prince?
You can go to Prince. I just wanted to know that. Thanks, Domin.
All right. Thank you very much. Prince, shoot. How's the coffee?
Oh, the coffee's done. I've been up for a few hours now. And I wanted to say good morning to you, good evening to you. But there's a couple things that I haven't heard talked about this morning that I wanted to bring up. And one of them I would love to share to the nest. There is a fabulous picture of two people here having breakfast today. Have you heard about this?
I shall go and ferret it out. Just give me 1 minute. I think I know which one you mean. And if it's not that one, then they can both be there. Do you, by any chance, mean a certain airborne artillery captain and a certain urban warfare specialist?
I do. I do mean them. Did my audio go or did your audio go?
Your audio went for a little bit, but we're back.
Okay. Yes, that is who I mean. That is who I mean. And I don't put things up in the nest without permission. So and there are some hosts who have given me permission to.
It's already there.
Cool. I just I was rolling through my special list of people, and I thought that was a fabulous thing to see. I would love to hear about that breakfast sometime when one or the other or both are on. The other random thing that I wanted to point out, because I haven't heard it for a couple of hours, and I'm sure it's been discussed earlier, but this wonderful article that our dear co-host Mockers is in about freeing the leopards.
So one of the UK tabloids actually picked up on the thing on Halloween, which is great. I hope it got lots of chat and lots of chatter and lots of publicity. And yeah, you're right. There's some pictures of some people who listen to the space, possibly, or at least from an account that listens to the space a lot, that specializes in the whole Free the Leopards campaign from Odessa, I think, as well as Mockers, as well as referencing a number of others. And that is truly terrific. I sincerely hope that somebody in the German Chancellery reads that particular British tabloid on a daily basis.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's pretty fabulous that even if it's a tabloid, Free the Leopards is getting some press. Yeah, and then the other thing I was gonna say, but you sort of referenced it was the 12 countries that will deliver 954 units of energy equipment to Ukraine, which I think is a fabulous thing, because there are a lot of items that they need. And our friend Victoria has talked to us a little bit about the things that they've been looking for, and yeah, she wouldn't share the amounts, but I believe she shared with some people what the items were that they needed. And it's good to see, even if, like you said, it's generators and things like that, it's good to see some countries stepping up help, and I'm hoping that it's with more of the specialized equipment that's needed to get their energy grid back up and going in a much better way. And then the
I
last
couldn't
thing,
agree more. Sorry, Prince, I just want to say I couldn't agree more, and this is exactly what Florian and Nick and I can delve into momentarily, I think. I just want to briefly say before you continue that back to the picture of Colonel Spencer and CJ. Colonel Spencer, I see you're listening. I hope that edition, that copy of the book was signed. Sorry, Prince, please carry on.
oh, you think he would give him a book that's not signed? Or if CJ already had.
He says he did. He says it's signed.
I figured it was. And then the last thing I was going to ask is you specifically, what's happening with Serbia and Kosovo?
Oh dear God! Oh, I knew somebody would ask that. No, Colonel Spencer's coming up. I think he wants to assure everyone that the book is indeed signed, and then I'll tell you about Serbia and Kosovo. Colonel Spencer.
Yes. Thank you, Prince, for highlighting the photo. What a great opportunity to have breakfast with one of our very own and one of our great leaders in our U.S. military. CJ had that book already, and I had the honor of signing it for him. Although I do carry a box in the back of my truck, there's no shame, and I would have given him one had he not already had it. But yeah, signed it. We had such a great conversation about all things Ukraine and U.S. military, and it was just amazing.
That's really great to hear, Colonel Spencer. CJ seems like such a good guy. Not that you don't. It's just that CJ isn't here, so I can praise him without embarrassing him. And I'm sure that you had an absolutely wonderful breakfast.
Indeed, and
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Just on the tabloid, I just tweeted a link to the relevant article. So if anyone reading wants to see mockers in a leopard skin top, or just to see more about how the issue was covered, I should warn you that the entire angle of the story is Ukraine urges women to dress as sexy leopards, rather than any sort of rather staid analysis of the full capacities of the Leopard tank. Although there is a little bit of that at the end as well, but it's the kind of tabloid that favors the sexy leopard print angle. But anyway, it's top of my tweets right now.
Thank you, Nick. Sorry, Colonel Spencer, carry on.
Not at all. That photo, which is interesting, is me following orders, because soldiers follow orders, and Axel was adamant that I had to have a photo of our engagement, just like I will have photos anytime I meet part of the MriyaReport family, to include my planned trip to MriyaReport, which is at the very top of my bucket and / research agenda, where I'll meet Axel and can do a combined research study of the Battle of MriyaReport.
Colonel Spencer, we have to ask you, because you've actually now seen CJ in the flesh. Is it true that CJ is over 7 feet tall?
No, so if anybody in the group don't know, CJ was a cadet when I was actually at West Point teaching, and it stood up the Modern War Institute. CJ was one of our cadets in our program. I had forgotten how tall, and luckily the photo doesn't highlight how small I am in comparison. But yes, both figuratively and literally, he is a giant.
Thank you, Colonel Spencer. We're very glad to have our friendly giant here with us on the team. If you wish to share anything else about the breakfast, feel free. But we will not pry. At least I'm not going to. If you'd rather keep that between CJ and yourself.
I mean, most of it was not work related, but about the space, some of the battles. We compared notes on the Battle of Kiev, Hostomel, the ideals about militaries and joint forcible entry. It was just a great conversation about how powerful the space is, and learning from everybody, and my own concerns about how the different militaries, not just U.S. militaries, are keeping the day-to-day awareness of the Ukraine-Russia war, because if they're not, they're wrong. I do this both to learn and to provide any thoughts I can, but it's such a powerful space that I think that all militaries should be doing. CJ, of course, agrees. He's trying to do his part within his unit, but that all military should be tracking the Ukraine war on a day-to-day basis, and then gathering the lessons and then adapting, learning, our formations, because Ukraine is teaching. I mean, there's nobody who's going to have more combat experience against a peer competitor, a major, military, even with all the Russia's fault, than Ukraine. Which brings me to current events, which I actually missed in my course. I have priorities in life, and family is the very top. Missed a chance to comment on the news about the announcement that President Biden will be sending U.S. military weapons, not inspectors, military
Instructors?
I wish we could say instructors. The words matter, so advisors and instructors are not authorized. Sending U.S. military personnel for the first time outside of the U.S. Marines guarding the embassy into Ukraine to observe Ukrainians' use of U.S. weapons. Some of it being congressional, just to quash congressional concerns about accountability of U.S. military aid, which I'm actually not against. Yeah, absolutely. You fight disinformation by having facts and firsthand knowledge. So, absolutely, I'm 100% for sending U.S. military observers. I actually tweeted out that I want combat observers, because it used to be a big thing to send not just U.S. military, even in all wars, observers, not advisors, observers to conflict, so that you gather the right lessons from both sides. So we will be sending U.S. military, let's call them observers, not combat observers, of the weapons the U.S. military is given, to help with oversight and concerns, and hopefully maintenance, writing that fine lines that these aren't combat advisors. But if we can send observers, why can't we send advisors? I would be for that.
I have to admit, I've missed those news. I saw a tweet and I thought, oh, it's just going to be some small squadron of them or something. But I know that's not an actual word. I'm glad that it has much more significance than I gave it, initial credit for. That's wonderful, Colonel Spencer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's needed, especially with the midterms. And while I think that we'll have U.S. bipartisan support, even if there is a leadership change, and I really support many of the representatives who had this as one of their top issues, despite having multiple domestic issues and things like that. That Ukraine is a very top issue of many representatives like Adam Kissinger. But this is a great, I think, action to help maintain overwhelming bipartisan support, by fighting different disinformation about corruption or blank checks, which is a myth, about the military aid, so that military aid can continue and hopefully increase.
At the end of the day, this is just my understanding, but I understand that the U.S. population trusts the U.S. military a lot more, on average, than they tend to trust politicians of any stripe.
Yeah, that's true, for sure. All polls show that. But I'm all for trust but verify, is what we say in the U.S. military. So 100% trust but verify. Establish oversight committees. and you can't beat anything other than a firsthand reports, firsthand observations like that.
Thank you very much, Colonel Spencer. Darrow, I trust, has a question or a point on this before we turn back to infrastructure and Florian. Darrow.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Colonel. My question is the equipment that we've sent. Do you think it would be important to have some of that equipment returned back to, say, our maintenance units to go through and analyze for different stresses that the equipment has gone through, so maybe that we can improve, or say like some of the field equipment, looking at what happened, what's happened over the time with some of the field equipment, because although we have a lot of new kit, some of it hasn't not seen the level of use and whatnot that it has seen in Ukraine. And what's your idea on being able to get full pieces back to the states so that they can be analyzed?
Yeah, I 100%. With me, actually, one of the topics of conversation between me and CJ is open source reporting of exactly that, even within his world of the artillery. So, open, shareable information that the Ukrainians have this direct informational flow of how the performance of the equipment is going, lessons learned from using the equipment. I would 100% support and maybe even be surprised if that's not happening, especially with a weapon. If there's weapons malfunctions, kind of like we do, Daryl, in combat. If there's some major malfunction of a piece of equipment, then especially if it's even if it's not catastrophic, that piece of equipment is sent back to identify the faults or deficiencies in the system, so that those aren't repeated. But CJ was sharing with me, which I'm sure he would share with the group, about that direct flow of information from Ukrainian artillery units to U.S. organizations that gets flowed back even to the U.S. to his organizations about lessons learned in not only weapons performance, but tactics, survivability, things like that. Absolutely. And I would want even further, which I'm just not privy to information, but Daryl knows this, but for the group, even when a piece of equipment has fired so many rounds, I was an old mortarman, so I know you do things like scoping the barrels, and you can even send it for higher level maintenance. I'm sure that some of that maintenance is in place in country, but I would absolutely be 100% for just over the border to Poland, to those U.S. maintenance contact teams to do that higher echelon weapons maintenance if the Ukrainians haven't had it established. Do that 30 level, 40 level maintenance to refurbish barrels and get them back into the fight.
Thank you, Colonel.
Thank you very much, Colonel Spencer. I will give you one more military question from Ellen, and then I promise not to take any more time away from your day. Ellen.
Oh, yeah. For John, do you think those inspectors could potentially change the policies of what type of equipment would be sent? Let's say that they come back with a very positive evaluation of how the Ukrainians are using this, and it would create more trust in order to send more powerful, more effective weapons.
So that's a tough one. I mean, I absolutely believe that with those firsthand reports that it would give more weight to the conversation to continue the flow of all military systems and reduce the concerns of camps with that as a high concern. I don't know if it would, I mean, it definitely wouldn't hurt the conversations to send different systems like openly giving the ATACMS, although I know we have a debate going on whether the ATACMS are already present. I think it definitely could not hurt, might help. Definitely will help at across the spectrum of allowing these conversations between political leaders to have more tools for the argument to ensure that those counter arguments of the risk involved in the, even if it's number of weapon systems, to be tampered with that firsthand knowledge. But maybe there's even changes that need, based on concerns and based on field reports, there are, these measures should be put in place. So the answer is pretty straightforward. I don't think that level of reporting will influence that political calculus on some of those systems. I think that's more of almost a higher level, the political risk camps that think that it is escalating, that really doesn't have anything to do with accountability or corruption or anything like that. Of the camps that are against some of those more advanced, longer reaching I think that my personal opinion is those top conversations is the political risk of escalation, not the risk to domestic support for continuing support, because there's a belief there might be that some of these weapon systems aren't getting to their intended locations, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much, Colonel Spencer. I think I lied because I think Darrow has a point here. I'm very sorry.
No, I think that's a follow-up, so go ahead.
No, this one's a little bit different. In your recollection, do you think there's been as much video that has been taken on the battlefield as this war? And what do you think the primary use of the videos? Because it seems that they've captured a lot of different types of events with video. And what do you think is the best outcome of all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Without knowing, so the answer to the question is no, there's never been, in my opinion, a war where this much full motion picture has been collected. There's actually a really great podcast with the Modern War Institute with General McChrystal and the head of an institute, I think it's at Tufts University, talking about the challenge the U.S. military ran into in analyzing full motion video that was collected through different sensors. It's a great podcast. Even knowing the of the kind of purposely collected video from drones, satellites, and all that can't be analyzed, but then the AI and all that gets incorporated. Knowing that from last 10 years or plus of the global war on terrorism, many locations, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, I still think that this war has the greatest amount of that type of collection because of the different echelons that it's being collected, right? And we probably only see a fraction of that from the feeds that we see in open source intelligence. How it's being used, I have no classifications. I have no use. I'm sure it's being used much like that kind of information was used in the past, but but all the way from the tactical up to the strategic, for all different warfighting functions, from targeting to intelligence to you name it. What I hope it's being used for, like we saw after my interest, like we saw after the Kharkiv offensive, is that it's being used for unit level after actions reports, unlike I think it's been done in the past to that level where the Ukrainian units are using that information either to exploit what they're seeing in Russian individual unit actions, but also to increase their own performance, because that's what a learning organization Daryl, as you know, does. You of course you gather everybody together, you talk about it, but now you have the ability to also take your unit level drones, unit level GoPros, and all this to incorporate and make themselves better, learn from their enemy, learn from the operations, and then the next time they're better. So that's what I hope. But this is a different war, unlike any wars that have been fought. In that video, those live feeds, the access to soldiers on the front line, so that the world can be more involved than they have been in the past, where Vietnam being the first TV war, the evolution of the TikTok wars. I don't know what the right term is for this war, but it is a historic war where all the populations involved in war, the military, the politicians, and the people, which all matter in the goals of war, can be intimately informed on the battlefield, rather than taking other people's opinions about what had happened. I'm sure, Daryl, even in closed doors where decisions are being made, these videos are used either to support both sides of the argument, if that's what you're thinking about.
Yeah, you right there where I was going with it. And I think other than World War II, where the Germans chronicled a lot of their actions, this is really the only the second time that I can think of where the enemy has chronicled as much of the war as the Allies have in this case, because there's a lot of feed from the Russian side as far as cameras, GoPros, what have you. So I think it's a double whammy as far as the information that we're able to capture.
Yeah, and I actually think, unlike even that, Daryl, I think I'm the urban guy, so I think the third actor in this is the urban environment, the sensors. So we usually just think about blue and red. My one trick pony thing is that we're seeing in this war is the third actor is the urban environment and the sensors within the urban environments, where we've already seen where facial recognition will be used and has been used in criminal investigations, in war crimes investigations, and hopefully in genocide investigations. There's so many sensors in the urban environments, the passive and active, that it is an actor in the conflict. I strongly believe that, whether that's the live feeds that I was watching in Kyiv, to the highway cameras, the building cameras. There's just so many collection devices, both video, audio. It's insane. But I actually consider, to me, that's why I think the urban environment is so unique. And we're seeing in this war, like we were seeing, whether it was the border crossing of Russian forces from day one, it's somebody's capturing it. And that's why in the urban environment, it's the world is watching, and it's being recorded. So how crazy is that we're going to be, they have already started to use video that was captured by a third actor, the urban environment, for attribution, for intelligence, you name it. It actually starts to blow your mind.
Thank you, Colonel. And let's not forget the banks. Thank you, Colonel.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Doman, I'm going to switch down to listener after having
Thank you so
a good
much.
morning. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Colonel. And if for anybody who's wondering, who's maybe new to the space, why and what gives Colonel John Spencer the authority to talk about the urban environment? He is the author of not just Connected Soldiers, but also Understanding Urban Warfare. That's the book that CJ is holding up ahead, in the nest, in that picture. I swear it's a regular sized book. It's just CJ that makes it look like a tiny little booklet. Blame CJ. It's not the book. The book is perfectly normal sized, I swear. And he's also the chair of urban warfare studies at West Point, the U.S. Army officer school, so he really knows what he's talking about. Thank you so much for your time, Colonel Spencer, and all the wonderful engagement here. I mean, I learned a lot from this exchange between you and Dara right now as well. So not that is a surprise, but I am forever surprised with how much I get to learn on this space. Thank you so much, Colonel. Florian, we delayed you so much with this discussion of Ukrainian infrastructure that Nick brought up with the tweets by Emmanuel Macron. I sincerely hope you still have your train of thought firmly parked on the switchyard of the railway of your brain. Florian.
No, I haven't lost it, but I carefully listened to the very good discussion. Thank you, Colonel Spencer, also from my side. What Nick said is, yes, Europeans need to get their act together to invest, to get the equipment to repair the infrastructure. But there's an interesting take on France. France actually doesn't have much of the infrastructure. Alstom sold all its stuff to GE, and it's actually manufactured in Switzerland rather than in France. So France, I guess, is supplying money or stopgap equipment like generators and other stuff. The thing they need, because they have hit substations, are transformers and the like. And that comes from Hitachi ABB power systems. It comes from Switzerland, comes from Sweden, it comes from Germany. I think stuff is also manufactured in Austria. So, and this needs to be supplied. On the Swiss side of things, tomorrow, and I researched this, the Swiss Federal Council will probably raise 100 million francs for this type of equipment and will give orders to our companies sitting here in Switzerland to prefer the Ukraine to deliver transformers and other critical power electronic systems to the Ukraine, that the stuff gets actually delivered. And other European countries like Germany are doing the same. So there is really a rally now to get the stuff to Kiev because we want the Ukrainians to stay. And this is also linked to the air defense situation, because now, once we repair the substations in front of the power stations, we have to defend that. We have to defend that. And I think this is really, really paramount, because electricity and heat generation is elementary that Ukraine makes it through the winter, and not just barely surviving, but in acceptable conditions.
And this is why these notes from Emmanuel Macron do actually genuinely matter, right? He talks about not just supplying Ukraine with what Ukraine needs, but also very much crucially supplying Ukraine, in terms of infrastructural help, but also very much crucially supplying Ukraine with what Ukraine needs in terms of air defenses additionally. And I really think that what he was referring to are these additional or at least the possibility of getting in the SAMPTs, right? I think this makes a whole lot of a difference. Earlier today, a couple of times actually, we had a bit of a discussion about the SAMPTs, and they seem to just be so much better than a lot of these older systems that are being sent, a lot more capable, both against cruise missiles, but crucially capable against ballistic missiles. And there are these news about Iran sending short-range ballistic missiles to Ukraine. So I can assure everyone that Ukraine would definitely like more high-end, very modern anti-air systems that are good against ballistic missiles as well. Florian, what's your? I mean, did you get any idea of how much of this stuff that Ukraine needs is being produced, say in Switzerland alone? Right. There was also that little news piece from the Aargauer Zeitung, which apparently is where a lot of these companies are that produce a lot of this stuff, just to the west of Zurich. Is there an idea of how much capacity they have to build things? Maybe just those ones that are there in Aargau. What proportion of the destroyed things in Ukraine might be, let's say, their monthly production? Is there any rough idea just what scale of destruction we're looking at over the recent weeks with these incessant missile strikes against Ukrainian infrastructure?
I have a very concrete list, but I don't want to talk about it.
No, it's not about the list. I mean, just like in proportion, like how many months of production of the Aargau company's stuff there is, maybe something like that.
This stuff is not just-in-time deliveries. It gets produced, puts in a warehouse. It takes usually a lot of transportation effort because it's big stuff. I hope for, but I haven't confirmed it, that there is stuff already there, and that's why the Swiss will raise this 100 million, because then some of the stuff that has been produced and not allocated to customers can be moved to the Ukraine. I think this is a motive behind it. And it's not only, it's an integrated supply chain. So it's Hitachi ABB Power Systems. There's production in Sweden, and there is supply mostly coming from Germany. And the Germans have now started to act on this also quite fast. So I cannot tell you how much of this can be delivered, but I think it's substantial that it makes a difference, together with also the stopgap measures.
The stopgap measures basically being things like mobile generators, the giant generators, diesel generators, they're like a container size each, right? Shipping container sized, together with the integrated transformer in there, right? And smaller transformers, yes. Maybe down voltaging. I don't know what the right words are. Some of the power lines, maybe just to get stuff running in.
Plus, the EU has today said they will increase transmission of electricity to Ukraine, because the Ukraine, as a former Soviet country, Soviet part of the Soviet Union, was not really connected to the European transmission grid. But this has been done, and initially in order to export power, because Ukraine lost a third of its population, 25%. But now the power is flowing the other way around. And that's important, because if production is not there, or production cannot be put to the transmission grid because the substations don't work, at least you can power the transmission grid strongly enough and make the energy flow from Poland or Romania the other way around.
So I think this is actually really important to note as well. The synchronous grid that encompasses pretty much all of continental Europe, right, is what on the eve, right, on the very eve of invasion, I think Ukraine first switched over to it, if I remember correctly, and then was it done after the invasion? Sorry, now I've forgotten this. Maybe it was done just after the invasion. Anyway,
it was done in April.
It was done. So in March it was switched over, and then in April it was fully integrated into it. That's how it went, right? Because there was about a month period in between. So in March it was switched over, and then in April it was fully integrated. And I remember when there was a report from whatever the appropriate body is, Pan-European Energy Grid administering body, saying, we were really surprised and impressed that Ukraine managed to keep like an above average stable grid, even though they were in wartime. And that was something that really impressed them, and that really made a difference to them as well. And as you say, Ukraine used to produce way more electricity than it consumed. It previously used to export it to Russia, and it used to export a lot of it to Moldova, because Moldova only has one real power plant on its territory, and that power plant sadly is also controlled by Transnistria, so it's particularly iffy, right? The Russian occupied part of Moldova. So it was a big electricity exporter, and especially if and when Zaporizhzhia power plant would be running fully at full capacity, the nuclear power plant, that would be a lot of energy generated. So it looked to be there were plans for actually very significant electricity exports from Ukraine to the rest of Europe for the winter. Like, they kept upping how much got to be exported every month, on a month-to-month basis in sort of May and June and July and August. And now, as you say, this would be flowing the other way. Now, why could it flow the other way? Because those substations that have mostly been taken out thus far are at the power plants, are at the various power plants, right next to the power plants, right? Where the, let's say, the somewhat messy electricity, the somewhat fluxional electricity that comes in into the substation from the power plant straight off of the generators, that electricity first gets cleaned up and put into the grid. So those are the substations that have mostly been hit thus far, at least to my understanding. And that basically means that Ukraine's grid as a whole is fine, is just there isn't the ability to connect the energy generation, the electricity generation part of it, to actually flow that into the grid. So pushing electricity in from the rest of Europe, that's an option, obviously. And hopefully that will be done in short term, because Ukraine genuinely needs a lot more electricity than it has right now available, because of those all of these hits on the Ukrainian electricity generating network. Okay, Florian or Nick, if you want to add to that, and after that we'll go to Alan. Nope. Okay. In which case, Alan, it is.
Yeah, I don't know anything about this, but it comes to my mind that some of the European leaders and American leaders.
Alan, do you drive an electric car?
Yes, I am driving an electric car right now.
Well, see, I knew that because I heard it. So I was going to say, look, of course. I mean, I can hear that it's a car, and I can hear that it's not petrol powered. So it could be a hybrid running on electric at the time. But chances are, because why? Because Norway is really high on the list of electric car ownership, of rechargeable battery electric mostly ownership, because it had such plentiful energy. Right? We're talking about energy. See, you know something about energy, because Norway had such plentiful energy, mostly from hydropower, that it exported the whole lot of it to Germany, and was actually a part of stabilizing Germany in ways other than gas-fired thermal power plants, because hydroelectric is really responsive to demand, right? You can just open the gate more and there's more energy. You close the gate, you stop the production of energy.
Yeah, except that they emptied some of the dams. But yeah, most of the energy is actually coming from continuous flowing waterfalls, especially the one that is exported. It should be, like now, it should be 99% of the energy that we export is either from windmills or from continuously flowing rivers. The dams are kind of like our baseline, like a nuclear power plant would be in France, for instance. So we need to kind of preserve that, and for the when we need to ramp it up, because it has been exceptionally dry last few years, actually. But what I wanted to say is that it must come into my mind that it just pops into my mind that a lot of these European leaders that didn't send the IRIS-T and the NASAMS and Patriots, etc. They're basically now paying for all of the destruction that the Russians did, and now sending the the air defense systems that Ukraine needs and needed already in March. So yeah, but my comment why I put my hand up was more to the conversation between Daryl and Colonel John Spencer. There's so many new aspects of this war, and one thing that hasn't been talked about a lot is the signals capacity, which is completely changed with the use of Starlink. In other situations, you have, or at least in past, often you have been limited by the movement of the battle group or brigade or whatever, to somewhat extent of how you could move along your signals capacity, your radio network, data link network, etc. And that is going to change a lot. I believe that Starlink is probably going to be on the eyes of a lot of militaries, and what those kind of systems provide, an effort of mobility and being able to create pockets of encrypted networks connected to Starlink, and then relay it to the brigade net or the army nets, and instead of spending enormous amount of efforts to connect your battle groups and your whole armies, which is a fairly substantial amount of logistics capacity that we never talk about on this space. So I think there's an enormous amount of things that different elements of warfare that is going to be drastically changed and remodeled after this war. and signals being one of them, and electronic warfare as well, which is evolving a lot. So yeah, that's my comment.
I mean, George, Darrow, right? When you were serving, could you have expected anything like this sort of level of a data link, just in terms of sheer throughput? George?
Sorry, Tillman, you broke up for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking, when you were serving, but Erlen's just been describing this, just sheer amount of data that's being communicated on the battlefield or from the battlefield to the backlines. Could you have imagined anything like that when you were serving?
Oh, hell no. No. No, not even close. Yeah, just the input they're getting from the drones is absolutely insane. To be able to pinpoint where your enemy is in real time and have that reconnaissance come to you in real time, no delay, right? It was a couple of seconds, let's say, with the data link. That's just over the top. Yeah, there's no way we could imagine that 15, 20 years ago.
Darrow?
I can tell you back when I was in a Prick 77 was the radio that was used, and you had problems with it because you had if you had a bad link, you'd have to have an eraser just to clean the contacts, just to keep your comms up in some cases. But yeah, it's nothing like. I think when the last when they started bringing in the equipment that would be able to locate friend or foe type equipment on the battlefield, and when the AWACS was able to determine where assets were in the battle space, I thought that was Star Wars to what they have now. That it's just a totally different data set when you start looking at the battlefield right now than from when I was in. You had to radio in your location on the grid, and that was how you knew where people were, and it wasn't exact. If you consider the difference between a 16-digit grid square coordinate to a 8-digit or say a 24-digit grid square coordinate. A lot of people don't think about that kind of stuff when they are using their cars or using their GoPro. I mean, their Garmin's when they are walking trails and things of that nature. When you start talking air support, artillery fire, and you getting down to 16, 24-digit grid square coordinates, that's just crazy.
Erlen?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that, for instance, we in the Norwegian Army, we spent enormous amount of resources on creating a high velocity internal, like a LAN, cryptated within the brigade level and even the further up, and down to the lower units where Daryl was mentioning the Blue Force tracker, etc. Those radios would connect onto the brigade net using some sort of a 512 kilobit. If you're lucky, if you were lucky, you could send a picture from recon, some sort of intelligence picture, photographs, videos, whatever, taken with normal digital cameras, put in an SD card, transferred to a rugged computer, and then if you were lucky on the brigade net, you could transfer 512 kilobits per second, but most of the time 32 kilobits per second. And now we're talking about 100 megabits just by putting an antenna up on the top of your roof. The amount of money spent on developing military grade radios that could transmit data, it's enormous amount of budgets that been spent around, and now it's just revolutionized by this big little box
that you could buy on Walmart or something. You know, it's crazy.
I think this is really fascinating. This is something that I'm sure that, shame we don't have Colonel Spencer with us anymore. But he's busy with life, I think, and other things that he has to do other than just talk here to us. And we're very glad that we get to have him as often as we do. But I think this is really something that he would love to be discussing. I bet the next edition of his book is going to have a whole lot of stuff about this in it. Not just these strong data links, but the ability to capture video, to broadcast video to other positions, at more or less at the drop of a hat, is kind of a matter of road. That is such a ridiculous difference. Not to mention the aggregation, and I think this is who was driving at this earlier. Alan, maybe you were driving at this earlier. The aggregation of data from all of these different sources. At the strategic level, right, at the central command level, that must be a gigantic difference.
Yes, if you want to go to the technical part, the problem is that the systems that basically the mainline data link systems, which actually work quite fast. You could, if you were lucky, you had 20 megabits. Problem is that when the whole brigade or a whole brigade system connects to that, you need to pipe it down. So it ends up with a bandwidth that is fairly slow, and just by eliminating those networks which were going over radio transferring data, and spread basically the signal from the Starlinks around with some sort of encrypted radio or with a data link to the units are in the most approximate operational zone. You would be able to achieve a lot better bandwidth and velocity, and you don't need to use like 100 different Starlinks in one battalion. You could probably distribute the signal from one Starlink over a vast area. Maybe you could cover a battalion's operational area with a couple of Starlinks, maybe 3-4 Starlinks, and that's it. And then you could probably have I would say maybe about 20 times or maybe even 50 times the data transfer capacity within the brigade level down to the foot soldier.
Thank you, Alan. Let's go to Antti and then to Dara. Antti.
Yeah, it still sometimes boggles the mind when I think back 20 years ago when I was doing military service, and the kind of kit we were using back then. It's it's funny and a little bit not so funny, but I think there were two things that kind of I think are good examples of how things have changed from previous wars. That there was I think there was at least 2 cases where someone living abroad or in different parts of Ukraine saw from their home security cameras that there were Russian artillery pieces moving into position at their house, and they would contact the UDF and tell them to light them up. And the other thing is totally different, but along the same vein, that there is this. We've discussed this previously on the space, that there is this mobile app in Ukraine for everyone to use, that they can report hostile craft that they sight, and the information goes to the UDF. I think that's it's definitely a war where like Colonel Spencer was saying, that every military should be daily tracking what's going on, and then disseminating all the developments that occur on the ground.
And actually, that's a really interesting point, Dante. I would love, and I mean really love, to know, and I know this won't be soon. But I would really love to understand exactly how much use that ended up being. I know it's going to be a long time before anything about this is even remotely said, right? Anything concrete in the slightest. It's going to take quite a while. It's going to probably be quite a bit after the kinetic war is over. But I am fascinated by that development, right? Have an app pointed at the sky, it shows it knows your location, it knows where the cruise missile is, and how much and how well they can actually integrate that signal into all the radar picture. I just think it's a tremendous idea, absolutely tremendous. I just don't have any clue, how useful it can end up being, because if you tell me that they will shoot down 0 things because of it, I believe you. And if you tell me that they're going to be able to detect and understand 20% more threats than they would have otherwise, I would also believe you. So I'm really wondering. I'm really curious how it's going to go. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, Antti.
Yeah, and I think the thing of it is that it's sort of indicative the way Ukrainians, we have seen the Ukrainians rise above and beyond what's needed, because it's such a simple concept, but it's still ingenious how they've managed to. I mean, what you say is absolutely true. We don't know what's the utility of that in reality, but I can imagine that it is of use. How much, I don't know, and those who do won't say, and thankfully so. But it's still basically an evolution of any air surveillance system that was in place in the First World War, and more so in the Second World War, where you could have any sort of civilian volunteer or home army volunteer in places with good visibility and on higher ground, or in even wooden constructed towers, or and they would have a pair of binoculars and access to a radio or a telephone, and when they saw something, they reported it, and that's it.
Yeah, it's just the next technical upgrade, right? Do you know what the difference is?
Yeah.
You can plug that thing from an app straight into whatever system runs your radar, and with a little bit of work, by little bit I mean a lot of work, maybe distinguish things, distinguish birds from cruise missiles on your radar picture, to simplify things massively and excessively by about 2 orders of magnitude. But that's kind of the point of that. The point of that is when you have really low flying objects, it's hard to tell what they are, if you can resolve them properly or not, to say, okay, that's not an accident, that's not a bird, that's not a blip, that is a cruise missile, right? Pay attention to that one. And this is kind of the simple bit. Daryl.
Yeah, one of the things we didn't talk about was on the ocean side, the geolocating items. We know that from geolocation, people were able to take out the Wagner headquarters. That's another totally, it's a totally different aspect to the data, but it is a quadrant of it. If you think, taking a photograph and being able to say this photograph is here based on different images around, with all the knowns on the internet, taking a photograph and saying this is here, because somewhere on the interweb there is another photo taken from that exact space. And so, that's another aspect to the data that's changing, that has changed this war. Um, so, and that was one of the things I wanted to bring up, but we didn't get to talk about it with Colonel Spencer, of course. But yeah, that's just another aspect of it. And the OSINT itself, um, Telegram, the use of all these different programs on the internet, as far as being able to um, see and hear the battle space.
Exactly. The Popasna Wagner one, I think that was the most trivial one in the sense that they actually showed the street address. But CJ, I really want to ask you this one. I don't know if you heard this bit when talking with Antti, but that app that Ukrainians can now point to the sky and say, there's a cruise missile flying overhead, there's a suicide munition flying overhead, loitering munition flying overhead, and here's my location. This is where it is. Do you think that's going to be any use in the end, or not so much? What do you reckon?
Well, first of all, thank you for putting me in the nest. That is sort of weird, but you know what? We'll take it for now. I actually was just talking to Colonel Spencer about this very thing.
I had to explain. CJ. Sorry, I had to explain to people that the book is of normal size. It just looks tiny because you're holding it.
There we go. Yeah. No, I mean it's a great size book. I've read about half of it so far. Can't recommend it enough. But in terms of this, the app notification, one thing that Colonel Spencer brought up was not something that I actually was familiar with, and it wasn't in terms of the cruise missile identification. It was in terms of actually artillery employment. Perhaps I've been a listener to the space, of course, since the day before the invasion, and I never actually knew this actually happened until Colonel Spencer went to Kyiv and confirmed it in person with actually Ukrainian officers that can geolocate equipment for kind of partisan activity, and then also the cruise missiles. But there was one in the beginning that they were using for targeting for artillery, and we may remember the TB2 strike on a fuel convoy, where this drone that had been made by Turkey and the Ukrainians had for about a year or two before they saw a lot of action in the war. Well, it was a 60 to 70-year-old grandmother, Ukrainian grandmother, who said, "Hey, there's a Russian convoy stuck outside of my house," and she sent pictures into the app. And lo and behold, a drone armed with missiles showed up and destroyed it. Right, so these things can work. Obviously, with air interceptions, it's much more difficult to do. But I think we may have to wait and see a little bit. But I think, when we talk about the interceptions rates being, 90% or more, it is very tough to get higher than that, even with all the applications and the best air defense systems in the world. And so what Ukraine is fighting for right now is to get it from 90% to as close to 100% as possible, and also to be better prepared for when, as the Ukrainian government announced today, Iranian missiles coming into the theater in the next month or so, and Russia will probably have the ability to load with 100 plus missiles, and that's when they can be a lot more devastating. When there's so many missiles flying overhead that they become, the interception rate goes down to about 50%. And so hopefully by then, not only does Ukraine have more air defense systems, every day to a lower level, but yeah, that's what I'd say about that.
Cheers, CJ. I think we have George, Bionado, and Yanis all wanting to talk about this thing. George.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's just think about this, that the Russians are having difficulty right now with Ukrainians, and most of their drones are off the shelf. Can you imagine what the battle space would look like if the United States was actually using the military drones that we have? Can you just imagine, the surveillance and the capabilities, the fire capabilities of the United States military against the Russians? I mean, it would absolutely be a slaughter, and that's not even. And the slaughter is putting it mildly. The damn thing would last 36 hours. I mean, they have no capabilities against most of the equipment, especially the electronic warfare equipment and the recon equipment that the United States would field. It would actually, it wouldn't even be close. So, and like Daryl said, I mean, Jesus, we went from using what he said was Prick 77 radios to now, you got a civilian with an app that can pretty much give you, right exact moment and time of when a convoy is moving into an area, even behind enemy lines, right? As long as they have a signal or able to get that data link out to you. So the war has changed. We're seeing a lot of things that that spooked us in the beginning, the Shahid drones, but it looks like the Ukrainians, with the help of some key and crucial friends, are figuring that out. But the Russians can't even figure out a DJI Magic drone. So I don't know what they would do with the Predators and things like that, and Gray Eagle drones that can tell if a mine has been moved from one spot 6 inches over. I mean, the mapping capabilities of these things is incredible. So, yeah, I just wanted to chime in on that. And like Daryl said, also, you can now take a picture and people can tell you exactly where it is, and you can call in a strike to within feet of where someone was standing. It's just crazy.
So CJ, actually, is this something that you're now thinking about? How would you be behaving differently, integrating these various sources of information into what you do as say a battery commander, hypothetically, right? One of your former roles. How would you do that? And I know you can't go into massive detail, but I'm guessing this is something that's a lot of a big topic of discussion among people, around you. CJ?
You're discussing it. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be discussed even more. But long story short, I think everyone's right here to some degree. Yes, the U.S. has this incredible capability, but it's never been stressed in this way where it needs to be in order to be effective against a near peer, right? We've had drones, dropping missiles since since Vietnam, but in the modern sense, since the mid-90s, and also observing for artillery fire, since the early 2000s. So this is not a new thing for us, but relying on it so much and using it, 70% of the time, it's not something that we're comfortable with. But I think we probably should get closer to that because, once we get very good at using them, then we also have to get very good at defending them or defending from them, right? The counter EW, the counter cyber, all those types of things that go into it that are very important, but aren't necessarily stressed at the tactical level. But the last thing I'll say, when we talk about these very expensive drones, $30-40 million drones, as in the Reaper and others, there's this fear that perhaps, we can't support Ukraine because look at what Russia and Iran are doing. They're launching these $10,000 to $20,000 drones, and these $100,000 interceptors are going up, taking them down. That's not sustainable. And I would just point to all of the different infographics we've seen this week of the total percentage of GDPs that are being sent, right? The U.S. Sending either as percentage of their GDP for military spending, right? Like less than 2%. And most other countries falling around that realm. Like if we were talking about a situation.
Yeah, this wasn't GDP, CJ. It was annual defense budget.
Yeah, sorry. To be clear, annual defense budget.
So it was like actually a few percent of GDP. It was like 3% of 6%, or 5% of 2%. That is a tiny amount. 5% of 2% is 0.1% of GDP. That are the sort of numbers that graphic had. Sorry, just had to clarify that. Sorry, CJ.
No, that's really what I'm getting at, right? So if we were talking about a scenario where all of the best Western and NATO gear being given was being, defeated or overcome by cheap Iranian solutions, and I would be thinking about this differently. But the reality is, it's not. It's, you know, the capacity to get more stuff to Ukraine is certainly there. Now, the question of how much should go and, you know, what is needed first, I'll leave that up to the experts. Obviously, everyone wants more, you know, because it's so important, and I agree, obviously. But at the same time, we're not talking about, you know, F-35s from the U.S. that are being overcome by $20,000 drones. That's not the conversation happening here. So if you see this line of Russian disinformation, be wary, as everyone here, of course, is. But it just doesn't stack up. This is not the full NATO spending versus the economic version of everything, or the basically wish.com version of everything Russia is using. And you can see that in how skillfully the Ukrainians are employing it. And that's really the important thing here, is that no matter what Ukraine has, as we've seen, they're going to employ it very successfully, whether it's captured equipment, whether it's damaged equipment, whether it's donated equipment. They're going to do their very best because they have great leaders in place and great training in place to use it to its full capability. So it's just a question of what people are willing to give.
Thank you, CJ. Bionade, shoot. And then we have Yanis and we have Daro. See, this is a good topic. When I get lots of hands, that's how I know it's a good topic. With a new avatar, Bionade.
Yeah, temporarily until my new fella is there. The point is, what's the future with warfare and digital media and everything like this, and what kind of possibilities have we? So, I mean, the camera and or the location where you are and see, oh, I see a cruise missile. That's one channel of input, but we also can use the audio channel, for example. And I was thinking about, for example, for these drones, they have a very distinct sound with a two-stroke engine, and as far as I understood it, they really can't change the speed of the rotation of the blades. So that would be another thing which would be easy to detect and use. Another thing is, for example, you can use your wireless antennas with special software and something like this. I think for passive radar, but I'm not pretty sure how that works. But there are some hacking spaces which are working on this thing on these things. Since years, so open source projects and something like this. So I guess that's the direction these usage will go in the next months and years, possibly.
Cheers, Bionade. Yanis.
Yes, hello. A little bit comment on this new approaches and technologies. Very curious to me was guy one in here in Twitter. His name is Richard Cordaro. So obviously he claimed he's physics PhD in University of Arizona, and he called himself independent researcher, and he used this so-called magnetic anomalies to analyze launches of different missiles.
If you have a question about that, you need John Ridge, because I have no clue. It's the one bit of physics that I am just not up with.
Yeah. No,
just letting you know before you dove to.
Yeah. But the point was that the guy basically it's like not a known method of spotting launches and tracking directions of those missiles, etc. And what he is doing, he is telling that he is developing like independently this method of tracking. He used open data from different research facilities who are using these magnetometers for different purposes, like for study, like air science, etc. And he creates such something like time graphs where he like say, oh, okay, here is like spike, and it match perfectly with like rocket launch, and here is another spike which may match perfectly when this rocket arrive at destination, etc. And so far this data has pretty good correlation. I just was very surprised that it's not known method, but like somebody like not related to military and just with some curiosity and physics knowledge can do something like that with the open data. So there is a lot more possibilities even for like regular person to do in this field. So I maybe I can tag you in his profile so you can
No, I've
take a
seen it.
look. Very very interesting by my understanding. Okay,
Oh,
thank
absolutely.
you.
And John Rich has been looking at that a little bit, and I think he actually looked into how it's supposed to work, and he understands it. And just like, nope, I'm not going to go into magnetism again. I always hated it. I have to say, so tough. Daryl, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention back when I was in, we used to have a radio operator. And then, and if you were with the grunts, there was always a guy that was holding a radio. We've gone from that guy to not having that guy because everybody was able to have comms, with the earpieces, this, that, and the other, to now we're back to having that guy, but instead of a radio, that guy now carries, say, a satellite uplink. We kind of changed the technology, got away from, the one guy, being the comm guy with us, to now you have the comms guy, but instead of it being a radio, he's contacting satellites. And I just thought that was kind of funny, to when you analyze the men in the battle space, who's actually down on the ground, and looking at who was doing what and the positions that they played. And the comms guy has been one of those kind of fluid positions, looks like.
Well, yeah, Daryl, I mean, I think that would be ideal scenario. Unfortunately for the U.S., we're not quite there yet, but hopefully soon. Although, to the credit of Ukraine, their ability to use Starlink in this way, where they have dedicated vehicles and dedicated people for this satellite uplinks that you're talking about to provide that secure communications for targeting, is invaluable, right? There's really no way that Russia can operate against it, and that's why it's so important to have that capability. If they didn't have it, they still could be successful. It would just be, that much more difficult. But yeah, in terms of artillery and really everything at a large scale, the communications becomes more important than training, more important than equipment. Probably, well, from my point of view, the most important thing. So having people trained on that, and then also training on what we know, of course, is the PACE plan, or the primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency, for the backups for when the things go down, which pretty well. But for other people, might not be aware that. If your radio stops working, you don't just quit. You have to keep trying to find a way to talk.
Barumus, what do you do if your radio stops working?
Well, I was the guy, like, later in my career, I was the guy carrying the radio on his back. And, to go into that satellite, I didn't have anything as nice as Starlink, but I've carried around the Inmarsat on my back and had to deploy that bad boy.
I think I know why they picked you. Because with your antlers, you could put the antennas up onto the antlers.
Oh yeah, they would string like an inverse Yagi antenna with my head. Yes, that happens all the time. But and I had a question for CJ, but he just dropped. I was going to dance around the subject of we're talking here with the revolutionary way the Ukrainians are using, excuse me, the revolutionary way they're using technology on the battlefield, like in terms of GIS, ARDA, and I just watched a YouTube demonstration the other day ago about the system that they have for civilians, the app they have for civilians, to take their phones pointed at the incoming cruise missiles or whatever they see, and take pictures of it and or video it, and in real time it's sent to it must be like some kind of air traffic coordinators that geolocate it, and they instantly know whether it's friend or foe, and they will allocate assets against that weapon system as as needed.
See, we touched upon this a little bit ago, Badamus, but see, I'm really fascinated about that. So I'm really glad you reopened this, because I really want to know, and I fully understand I'm not going to get to know this maybe ever, maybe for 5 to 10 years, but I would really like to know, how many cruise missiles they will now have correctly identified, or loitering munitions they will now have correctly identified, these things that fly low, that are very difficult to tell apart from other things on a radar, right? That they otherwise would not have had correctly identified. Because I have no idea how to develop an intuition for this. It could be 0, it could be like 20%. And I would happily believe both numbers. Any guess, Badamus?
There are, like, since World War I, we've had trained spotters, right? Since things have gone in the air, there's been people that can look up in the air and look at a thing. And CJ or Daryl, we do have, or Auntie and Constantine, we sat at that table. Well, the sergeant or warrant officer holds up like a black and white silhouette of something and goes, "What's that?" We've all done the weapons recognition courses and whatnot, to various degrees. There's people out there that have a real knack for it, and then there's people going, I can tell if it's Russian. A lot of the Russian equipment has certain characteristics, and fighter aircraft. For most grunts on the ground, it's shiny. Shiny, zoom, drop bomb. And then they go off and they eat the crayons. And they're none the wiser. And then you have people that have a real knack and look up and go, "Oh, you know what? That's a caliber, or you know what? That's a kitchen missile." Oh, you know what? They're fired in 3s, 6 seconds apart. So stand by. There's people that are really, really on the ball with stuff like that. And then because a lot of the stuff on the battlefield, you're so hyper focused on your job. If I was if I was still a Herbie in the artillery, and if anything flew anywhere near us, you get a little edgy. It doesn't matter if it's friend or foe or whatnot, because you never know when those American A-10s are flying over you that they see you as actual 105s or targets out on the range. Like you're all that's always playing in the back of your head. But you're mostly concentrating on doing your job, as you should. There's a certain amount of situational awareness, but you're always concentrating on doing your job. I kind of lost where I was going with that there, buddy.
Hey,
no, it was good. It was good stories.
Hey, Battle Moose, do you think you can tell a BMP from one of the wheel vehicles? What is it? Gepard 1, I think it was, that you Canadians have. Do you think you could tell the difference of them off one of those cards?
At a time, I was really, I could tell you the make and model and where they were made and stuff like that, because I nerded out. I used to have the great big Soviet picture book and just stare at Soviet armor for hours and hours and hours and whatnot. And
to be clear, Baromus did this as a child, right? He had a picture book, picture book when he was 5 years old, when other kids had other picture books.
Oh yeah, we all played army. So, but young Battle Moose may or may not have stolen that from the public library, and it's still sitting in my mom's house in Northern Ontario. So yeah, it's just stuff like that. And maps really interested me. I could stare at maps for hours. Maybe it's some ADD symptom I have, but I really dug maps, and I really dug armored equipment, and yeah, I was really into aircraft as well. Probably aircraft more than armor. I knew enough. If it clickety clacks, shoot at it. Well, I see. We got CJ back. Sorry for dancing around your dinner table there, CJ.
Well, I didn't. I've been listening the whole time. I don't want to miss the Battle Moose career review. This is great. I really appreciate it.
But to get back to my point, now that you're here, we were talking. I guess you guys were talking about it earlier. The application of this technology that the Ukrainians are basically trailblazing for the rest of us. And like I like the point you made earlier about stress testing. A lot of these systems have been around for some time, but they've never been stress tested in battle. And it's never been stress tested against friend or foe. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, despite your artillery veneer, I know you have quite the background in a lot of other things of this nature. So I trust your input more than mine. But when we talk about stress testing, one of the examples, like you take the Excalibur round, right? It had been fired in combat 1,400 times by the U.S. and Canada and Australia, but it hadn't been fired 2,000 times like the Ukrainians have. And so one of the discoveries that was made was that these things can be programmed fast enough if you have a really good trained crew, like the Ukrainians do, to be used in counterfire. So what does that mean? It means instead of getting a hit that there's a Russian radar and a Russian artillery round, one or the other, basically Ukraine can use a drone, and while the Russians are getting set in, they can fire an Excal round. They'll have to shoot once, and the whole thing is set up and destroyed before it ever even fires. And so this is not how the system was designed. This wasn't really its intended purpose, but Ukrainians have used it this way. And so now not only are they preventing civilian casualties by these systems being destroyed ahead of time, but also, it's a very cost-effective solution to fire, one, albeit expensive artillery round to destroy a much more expensive artillery system entirely, and all the ammo and perhaps the crew. So that's one case. And the last thing I'll say is, we got to be careful when we say stress testing and we talk about Western systems, because just because an item of equipment saw combat doesn't mean it saw the same level of combat. So when we say, yes, MQ-1s or the Gray Eagles or Predators has seen, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hours of combat, well, they've never been pursued by air defenses. And you can go through the list of things like that. So that's not to say, and I think George is right, there is still more systems that could be helpful, even if they were matured in the GWAT or coin landscape. But, it's important for Ukraine to decide that, because I think they know best. And they also know what's working under stress too, which is the biggest thing for us listening. What kind of systems are holding up and which ones aren't.
Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction you make there. The level of combat, or if anybody served in the Canadian Forces, and you get the pay differential for deploying, the hardship level of the tour you're doing. So if you got a level 4 there, you're all in. And yeah, there a lot of those systems have never been pursued by a Foxbat or whatever that Su-57 super sleek Raptor rip off is, or their ultra cool high speed guy air defense radars.
Okay, we have a bunch of hands up for a while now. This is really cool. I really love listening to you guys talk about this. Bionade, I think you've been there the longest. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm. What I really find interesting is also all the civilian applications. I think I posted in the last 2 days 2 or 3 links to really famous and internationally famous hackerspace, which makes every year conferences and something like this, big conventions. The Chaos Computer Club. If somebody's interested, they have a big library of all their conventions and their presentations. What I wanted to point out, for example, which things, open source projects for civilian applications, which I can use, for example, is there's a project some years old, Osmocom it's called, some open source project for telecommunication networks and open source software. I put up a link in the nest. Who is interested? This is how you build radar systems and how you can build your own homemade radar system. And I think it gives some basics for people who are interested. And earlier today we had a conversation about the electrical grid in Ukraine and how blackouts work and so on. And there's also a presentation about this, for example, how is energy produced, how what are the problems with our infrastructure and something like this. So who is interested, have a look. It's really nice. And I'm always astonished how this basically civil functions like GPS in phones or cameras or audio, and so some open source projects are integrated and tested in some kind of battlefields. For example, the thing with the magnetic effects and something like this. So you take such civilian applications and you can use it for military applications in some emergencies as workarounds, and it's really great.
Nick. And thank you, Bionade. I'll check it out when I have the time. It looks really cool. Nick.
Hello. Yeah, I was
we hear you.
thinking about this app that you point at an incoming missile and recognizes it. Does anyone have a link to a description of that? My first concern whenever I hear things like that is how are you going to hack it? How are you going to spoof it?
That was my first concern as well.
Spoofing GPS coordinates is not hard, and even if you didn't want to do that, you could just set a bunch of bots to just upload pictures of, I don't know, probably Rick Astley. Never going to give you up.
Okay,
so I wonder how they control that.
Can I please tell you? Can I please explain? Okay, because those were my questions as well when this first came out 3 weeks ago. Okay, so I know exactly what questions you're asking, so I know how to answer them. So in order to log into it in the first place, in order to submit something, you need to log through DIA, which is the Ukrainian digital identity. I've sent you a link to how it looks like on the screen because Olga from Odessa posted it. So first of all, you need to log in with your digital identity, so it's much more difficult to spoof. We've basically been told, look, it's fine. They don't think it's going to be a problem at all because DIA is so well set up. I don't know. I think Estonians might have had something to do with it. So there's that. Secondly, you kind of need to point it to the air, I understand. So you pick what you see, a rocket, a plane, a missile, a plane, a helicopter, or a drone, and you click a thing, you point it to the sky, and it has your GPS, and it has the imagery, my understanding is, and which direction it's going, therefore, because there's like a compass integrated. I don't know exactly how it works, but it's all secure through the whole digital identity thing. So it should be pretty good on the basis of that.
I like, here in Spain, we also have a remarkably good digital identity scheme. If you have a Spanish national ID card with a chip on it, you can just plug that into a little $5 reader that goes into your USB port, and it authenticates yourself to every government computer. If you don't have that, you can install a digital certificate, or we also have a challenge response system that can be used by pretty well anyone. I mean, almost literally homeless people, because it just requires you to have a mobile phone that can receive SMS messages. And I say this because I'm a huge fan of secure digital ID, but I come from a country, and indeed I have passports of 2 countries that are both very skeptical about the idea of citizens carrying ID cards. And so I always like to see when the notion that the state can positively identify you in an unambiguous way is correctly identified as being a positive thing for the citizen and not a threat to their identity, which too many people in English-speaking countries, unfortunately, seem to believe. So yeah, cool. Mic check.
Yeah, I can hear you. Domin's possibly just unconscious.
He's probably looking at something on reading, trying to get some content there.
Well, you go ahead, Daryl, and then it's me, I think.
Yeah, one thing when we were talking about the weapons that we have not sent, and that's the things that we have that can actually machine learn, say, shapes of vehicles and things like that that can self-identify targets. And I'm pretty sure the main reason we did not do it is because both friend and foe in this war have been using a lot of the same equipment. And so if it could identify a BMP, it really would not be able to tell which side it was on, because they're both using it. So I think that's one of the things when we start talking, target acquisition and things of that nature, and the things we could have sent but didn't. That's really something that has not seen this battle space.
Yeah, you know, Daryl, those artificial intelligence to recognize vehicles is an interesting one. About 10 or 11 years ago, I went to an artificial intelligence conference in Oxford, and they told the story of a US military artificial intelligence that had been designed to detect tanks. And the problem is that all of the photographs they'd used to train it to detect certain tanks in like heavy cover in like forested areas and stuff, all of those photos had been on a cloudy day. And then when they used it for real, it was a sunny day. And what they realized is that it actually trained it to detect whether it was a cloudy day or not. So there's all sorts of weird things that can happen with artificial intelligence when you don't know what it's doing. So it's nice to share that story. I'm sure it's advanced quite a bit since then, but we've been promised self-driving cars for a long time now, and they're still having trouble. The joke I wanted to make was a different one now. I'm still disappointed that the Ukrainians haven't yet combined a food delivery app with HIMARS. So you're a Russian soldier, you're bored, you're hungry, you want to order some pizza. You're like, oh yeah, pizza, great, it's all going to turn up. Okay, what's your GPS coordinates? Oh yeah, I'll put them in. Yeah, that's where I am. And then instead of pizza arriving, HIMARS arrives, or something from the Atacams cigarette company. Are you back with us now, Domin?
I'm back with you. I apologize. After 11 hours and 32 minutes running straight, my app decided to give up the ghost. But I am back. Thanks to Ghost. CJ.
Just to finish with Tom, was there not actually early in the war there was a story that Ukrainian women were getting in touch with Russian soldiers via WhatsApp or some other, and pretty much that was going on. I think their phones were then being geolocalized. They were sort of looking for the traffic that was, the particular protocols that were being used. And I seem to recall that I don't think the Ukrainians actually sent someone in person to kind of meet them from the date, and it turned out to be Vasily rather than Tatiana, and with a big knife. But I certainly recall something along the lines of, Ukrainian women saying, "Hey, soldier, I've always wanted to date." I believe that's the modern term, a Russian, and were in some way causing them to come to harm. So while that's a nice idea, Tom, I think, as usual, the Ukrainians are several months ahead of us.
Yeah, it was a couple of weeks after my Pizza HIMARS crossover app that I found out. Yeah, they had actually done it. It was Ukrainian women, but it was Ukrainian women working for the intelligence services, and they got the soldiers to send them photos, and the photos had the geotagging on them that shows where they were taken, and so they knew exactly where they were. And I believe they delivered HIMARS instead. So I just wasn't thinking right pizza. I wasn't thinking big enough. Women. That's how you lure them.
So I've now got to spend the next 10 minutes thinking up really terrible puns for Deliveroo.
Yeah, most definitely.
Other delivery companies are available. CJ.
I was just hoping, Tom, I mean, in the vein of food delivery from HIMARS, I'm hoping, Tom, you saw the Halloween footage from Fort Sill yesterday.
I saw it. I was very disappointed, CJ. That is abysmal range.
I didn't.
Abysmal.
Oh, Tom, I'll send it to you. You're not going to believe this.
I'll do it, CJ. You keep talking. I'm going to send it to Tom.
No, I mean, in terms of using apps, this is a key point. I think they're, oh man, I'm going to go out of my space here, but long story short, I think there's like a different understanding with how Russians use social media than Ukrainians do, and especially with like food delivery and things like that, which are so common in where most of us live. It's not so common, and so they're able to target some people using Grindr, of course, and other dating apps. But the biggest thing in terms of using phones against the Russians was my understanding, the program to basically pay Russians to surrender their gear, their people, or their equipment. And what had happened was Russia sent FSB agents and basically handlers to go infiltrate the pipeline. And it turns out it was all a double play the entire time. And throughout that process, Ukraine didn't necessarily really care about actually getting Russian tanks captured. They cared about getting all the FSB locations in Ukraine, which they ascertained through that investigation. So really just an Uno reverse card. Russia played themselves. Just great work there all around.
I think Russia plays themselves quite a lot, really, don't they?
Hey, I'd rather that way than any other. Sparkles.
I was really trying to get a meeting done, but you guys were having me in stitches over here, and I had to come up because it was really funny. Tom and Nick and CJ, and y'all are great. You guys are just great. I also do want to confirm that I know someone specifically, where I won't say any names because this agency doesn't exist, that does use dating apps to find out information with respect to what the Russians are doing. So yeah, just be careful what you're doing on those dating apps, guys. Okay.
There was a thing early on, before the invasion. One of the ways they knew where all the troop concentrations were was that they were tracking Russian troops who were on Grindr. So for all of this, there are no gays in Russia. It's like, no, we've got data. There's a few. There are a few in Iran.
I believe we also have footage, do we not?
I believe we do have footage, yes.
Marcos?
Yeah, I did want to just say that one of the things that just amazes me about the Ukrainians and their government is just how they've relied on these digital tools, though, to help their citizens. There was a great article that was written by a Ukrainian journalist that broke them all down. It was, how you're able to submit forms. Each citizen has a digital fingerprint. Of course, they have the air raid alert. They have the enemy reporting digital tool. So anyways, they're very, very innovative in that way. And I think we don't necessarily take the time to think about those things, but I personally found it really pretty amazing. They also have, I was trying to think of all the apps. They also have a medic app. So you can download the app and it teaches you first aid stuff. So it doesn't matter what location you're in, you can get first aid. Yeah, anyways, there's a lot of digital tools that the Ukrainians have to help their citizens and help their society address public health and safety, which I think is amazing.
It is really good, right? And this, I don't know, CJ, can you talk a little bit to morale and how important morale is, and knowing, why you're there and what you're fighting for, especially when you're under artillery fire. And I know that you weren't ever countering that, but nevertheless.
Yeah, I mean, some sort of stability or consistency is the most important thing, I think. If people are used to calling home once a week, then it's important to be able to do that. It's not necessarily about having 24/7 access, but that was one of the problems in the beginning of the war, was both sides were constantly on their phones 24/7, and it was causing a lot of artillery missions to be prosecuted on both sides. Since then, the amount of cell phone usage has decreased greatly, but there's still some notable exceptions that people mentioned earlier. I think it's about having some sense of normalcy. So, whether that's packages being shipped to the front, or just the ability to FaceTime, whether it's in a secure location or not. Like, it's kind of hard because I really don't know what the Russian expectation for this was prior to. A lot of them had their phones taken, even in Belarus, months before the war. So, the good news there might be, well, then they're not so used to having it. But the bad news there might be they're more desperate to use it once they get to Ukraine. So, I'm not sure really what the right answer is, but over time, if you're not going to be rotated out, or more importantly, if you don't know when you're going to get rotated out, and that's the most important thing. You can, be deployed for a while to a place, but if you really have no idea when you're leaving, then that's when it really starts to get bad morale-wise. And we saw that when the Russians started their, general mobilization, or their larger scale mobilization, was all of these people extremely upset that basically they had been stop loss. So people that were going to rotate home suddenly couldn't anymore. And that was more devastating than just being there in the first place, or being there for a long time. So that's why it's so important that Ukraine has enough people that they can rotate in and out in order to provide as much normalcy as you can, and also just a sense of consistency, which is you're able to go on if you have that. But I imagine Tom could speak more to that than I could.
Would you like to, Tom?
Sorry, so that was rotating people in and out so they can get a chance to rest? Was that what you were
and like
saying?
a sense of normalcy at the front, when you're at the front for long stretches. And CJ's better at this than me.
No, I guess, well, more specifically, Tom, because we were talking earlier about the tendency for people to get or to develop PTSD or PTSD-like symptoms. The idea that there's two sort of factors at play, just very generally, of course. The idea that you're in a combat area for a long time, and the other factor that you're in high intensity combat. And what I was trying to explain is that, at least from what I've seen in World War II, Vietnam, and then my own personal experiences, that there was this balance between being in a combat zone for a long time and nothing really happening, but still always being under threat, versus the way the Ukrainians are trying to do it, which seems to be the best case you could have for mental health in this situation, where you're going to the front for 30 days. It's going to be very intense, but you will be relieved at the end. Whereas with the Russians, they don't get that. They get 6 months out there, and it can be very bad or very good, but they really don't have a sense of control in the matter.
Yeah, I mean, a sense of control is quite critical for mental health generally. So having that sense of control removed from you is not going to be helpful. I think the problem with something like PTSD, though, is that whilst there are factors that make it more or less likely, it's very difficult to predict who's going to be affected by it and to what extent, because some people can go through really traumatic events and not be that traumatized. I'm halfway through reading, or listening rather, to an audiobook called On Combat, which John Spencer recommended to me. It's by a former Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, that he's written in conjunction with a former police officer. And it basically looks at the psychology of combat situations from the perspectives of soldiers and policemen primarily, because they see a lot more combat than anyone else. And it's talking about some of the intensity of situations, and some of the really sort of bizarre psychological effects that can happen, like people getting tunnel vision, When we had James Vasquez on here, he was talking about when he's downrange and firing a rifle, it doesn't deafen him. But if he was on a target range, a shooting range, he'd wear ear protectors. And there's things like people not hearing the sounds of weapons, which is crazy if you think. I mean, I've never fired a firearm, but they're pretty loud. So, you know, there's all sorts of strange things that people's brains do to sort of try and protect them and help them survive that are sort of outside of people's normal experiences. Like tunnel vision being a big one. People like get totally focused on what's in front of them, and they like can lose all peripheral vision. There's all sorts of things. I'm rambling slightly, but yeah, I don't know enough about PTSD in veterans. I've got a colleague who does, and I have invited him to come on and speak to you all, but he's a bit shy. But what he is prepared to do is to offer some training to Ukrainian people. So as and when I get contacted, which I'm hoping to be, he's someone that can do that. So that would be good. I'm not sure that really answers your question, CJ, but it's because it's a really complicated one. I think all of soldiers are going to need rest and rotation. They're going to need a chance to sort of decompress from a really stressful environment. But I think the main factor is going to be what they see and experience when they're in that environment, because you know, even with any given military, people in different areas are going to see no combat, some combat, or hellishly intense combat, and that's really what's going to make the main difference, I think.
Well, no, I mean, that is such an incredible answer, which is, you know, what we can expect in the space, and especially with you, Tom. I guess, you know, I am looking for a more, I'm not asking you to defend a certain point or whatnot, but I guess what I was trying to get at before was, do you think having access to connectivity with families and social support will help lessen the chances that people could develop these symptoms? I mean, it seems kind of obvious, but I think for those that haven't come close to experiencing this, it might not be that clear of just how important this is.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that does seem to lessen the chances of people developing PTSD is if they've seen something horrific and they're able to talk it through with people, then one of the things that our brain does, like when we form memories, you think about we form a memory and then that's it, it's a memory, it's like a photograph. And that's not how it works at all. Like memories are like a big fish story, you know, so you caught a fish and it was 1 foot long, and you exaggerate and you say it was 18 inches or 2 foot long, you know, it was this big, right? And then what happens is you say it was 2 foot long, you kind of remember really it was 1 foot long, but then the next time you remember it, you actually think it was bigger than it was. And so gradually the fish gets bigger and bigger with the retelling, right? So the thing about memory of something that's traumatic is that, you know, PTSD type memories are visual and have sounds and smells, and they're very visceral. They're like a horror movie type memory that's really intense. But if you talk it through with people, your brain can actually change the memory slightly so that it's a more like wordy memory. So I know John Spencer was on here and he said that he saw someone under his command in Fallujah get hit in the blast radius of an RPG, and it broke his jaw and knocked out all of his teeth. Now you imagine actually seeing that, how much more scary that would be than just hearing the words of it. So, you know, if you're able to talk through, and it could just be with fellow soldiers, it doesn't have to be with civilians or family. And I think a lot of people aren't going to want to tell their family about that. You know, so maybe being able to phone home to mom or your wife or something, you're still not going to want to tell her. But simply having some time when you're not in intense combat to talk about, oh God, that was horrible, you know, how so-and-so, it knocked out all his teeth. Yeah, he's doing okay. He's going to be all right. It's going to protect you. One of the factors that is really detrimental is drinking alcohol. So all of these drunken Russian soldiers are going to have higher rates of PTSD because there's something about using alcohol to avoid anxiety that perpetuates the avoidance, which is part of PTSD. It's the fact that you're scared of it and you want to avoid thinking about it that sort of puts your brain on guard looking out for it, and that can actually make you think about it more. Like avoidance of triggers will make you more scared than if you subject yourself to them. So yeah, again, I'm kind of rambling. I would hope that social support would reduce that, but I don't actually know of any research suggesting that immediate social support would reduce that. The only thing I can think about is that in the aftermath of 9/11, when a lot of people did get PTSD, a smaller proportion of people got PTSD considering just how many people were affected, compared to, say, people that are in like automobile wrecks where they're trapped and they have to be cut out of the wreckage by firefighters and things like that. And the hypothesis as to why that might have been was that if anyone in New York in, say, October, November, December of 2001 suddenly started freaking out and crying or having a flashback or something, any New Yorker would totally understand why and what it was about. And so having that social support from others, having gone through something like as a people in a city, meant that people could support each other in a way that you can't support someone that's been through something horrific totally on their own. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, CJ.
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you.
Colonel Spencer?
He's hot mic listening away.
Colonel
John,
Spencer?
you hot mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
That's so weird. The Twitter glitch shows that I'm a listener, and I need to push the request button. So I'm
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting, because we hear your television.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I would have not had it on. I just really have
We
no
thought
question.
you wanted to add to Tom's thoughts.
I 100%. I mean, it is why. I mean, Tom's last few minutes is why I wrote Connected Soldiers. CJ's question is the question that I asked in the book about how access to external support, social support networks impacts individual soldiers' ability to deal with combat, both as an individual and as a group. And I just want to second, if you can still hear me, Tom's comment about coping with war. So first, I definitely don't have the education on the impacts of trauma on the brain. I know from just working in the office that kind of sparked my idea to write Connected Soldiers, going through some of these things myself. And one of the biggest predictors of trauma to an individual is previous trauma. So if you think about Russian soldiers, what we know from the experience, some of the experiences they go through leading into combat, the rape, the the beatings and things like that. I mean, it's almost like they're priming people to have PTSD, both individually as individuals, right? That greatest predictor. But the point of Connected Soldiers is right to ask the questions to people like Tom, to hope that there's more research. But one of the things I came through, actually, I didn't start when I wrote the book. Analyzing, I knew that if somebody comes back from a traumatic like combat event and they don't talk it out with each other, the only people who would have been in the event with them, although like Tom says, even if you're in the moment, this is what I experienced. Two individuals, and this is what police experience too, in taking witness statements, is that two individuals at the same moment can see totally opposite things. So when a group comes together after a traumatic event and they each talk through, they can either identify problems with somebody's having, which could be based on this total mental makeup up to that point, or also confirm or deny, like, this is what I saw, this is what you saw. When you have somebody who can reach out and is relying on external social support to cope with what they just went through, I think research will have to show that is as less effective as going through it together as a group and coping with it. So that's why I think the group, it's almost like group therapy. When a group who just experienced the event together comes together and talks about it. And I know that there's lots of science to that, but what we're seeing, to CJ's question, I'm sorry to hijack the conversation. It's just, it's so, this is why I wrote Connected Soldiers. I'm so passionate about this. I don't think there's also been enough research on, like Tom said, rotating soldiers. Of course, we know that Ukrainians are going to have better performing soldiers who rotate out of that front line and have a sense of security rather than always feel like you're under threat. But like Tom says, that can differ along the line. How much threat are they under? There are different types of stress. But there's not research too to see if, like World War II, you pull back an entire unit. Again, war is an individual act, and there's a lot of individual mental stressors, but it's also a group act. So in World War II, they would rotate the group back, the whole unit. And then we started individual rotations and rotating individuals back. And what I'll leave you with, CJ, is that one of my worst days of my life was when I was in combat. I got rotated. I was allowed to go on, rotate back, spend time with friends and family. And it was the reconnecting with those stresses the day I came back. That was actually traumatic to me. So there's just more research that needs to be done on which one is effective. I 100% agree, and I would make that statement. The Ukrainians know that you can't keep soldiers under the stresses of combat continuously without relief, either individually or as a unit. And this is what I saw when I was in Lviv, and it was great to see. The soldiers do need the support of their families, their nation, and they need all that. And the Russians don't have that, but the Russians got a lot of problems. And I really find the comment about the alcohol use in combat is very interesting too, as even the Western military, like the U.S., banned the use of alcohol. And now I'm thinking there may be, other than just good order and discipline to regulating that, there may be actual mental reasons for that.
Yeah, maybe real briefly on the alcohol. I think we've maybe all had the experience where we're experiencing just some normal level of stress, and you have a drink and the stress goes away, right? And that's one of the reasons why it's addictive, because if you've, got a lot of stress in your life and you start drinking to make it go away, it works in the short term. The problem is you wake up the next day and whatever you're stressed out about is still there. And hey, you could reach for a drink again, and it's a slippery slope sometimes. The problem, if you've got some serious stress, some combat stress, maybe some post-traumatic stress, is that you've then got a ready way of trying to avoid it. And avoiding it prevents your brain from processing the memory into something that's less traumatic. So whatever therapy you do for post-traumatic stress disorder, the common theme is talking through the memory and talking through the memory and talking through the memory, which at first is terrifying. But if you do it for long enough over time, it actually becomes boring. And if you can do that, it's no longer scary. And then the next time the memory comes up, people are remembering. I had a guy who was remembering talking it through with me in the therapy room more than he was remembering what actually happened, which is kind of weird. But yeah, if people are using alcohol to avoid, it seriously causes problems.
Evening all, I'm just going to take this opportunity to say hi. I don't want to intrude on this excellent conversation, so please carry on.
Tom, I'm glad you're enjoying that on combat. And I didn't come up when James was talking about that. I think it's called ocular exclusion. Basically, when all those hormones have released, the adrenaline and although it's not, I briefly touch at one of my mentors, Dr. Ed Koss, really has taken years and years to dive deep into that human response to the chemicals that were released under stress of combat, whether that's distress or even, not all stress is bad. But I really appreciate that James brought that up and made a lot of people curious on how the body will do things like increase your heart rate. The fight or flight is actually, that's not just a saying, that's actually a chemical response, and your body will start to do things to conserve energy, protect the human body. It's a fascinating area of research, from tunnel vision to that ocular exclusion, which and all the other things that your body is doing to either focus you, conserve energy, prepare you for fight or flight. It's a fascinating study, and there's lots of chemicals being released, and there's good ones, there's cortisol, there's bad ones, and in one of my articles I actually wrote, Tom, you made for Wired, was that and maybe you have, that scientists used to deploy into combat and collect that data. And the last point I could trace it was Vietnam, for the Americans, would go into fire bases that had been under attack and collect blood samples and urine samples and whatever samples that scientists need from soldiers and then try to make conclusions about the soldiers that weren't experiencing all the bad chemicals, and they had no problems. And there's so much left to warfare that is not necessarily a myth, but taken for granted, a belief in human responses to certain types of stress. Like you said, there's so many varieties of stress, and then it could be totally different in two people standing next to each other. And some of that's about how much they believe they have control of the situation. It could be on their experiences up to that moment.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting a lot from that book. I think, because I only ever see civilians that have been through these sorts of things. I personally don't work with veterans, but I've got colleagues that do. And I don't think enough is known about some of these extremes. And I don't think people always want to say. So, like, for example, when we're in a very stressful situation, typically our brain detects danger and sends a message down to our kidneys to release adrenaline and cortisol. And everyone knows about fight or flight, but not as many people know that it's actually fight, flight, or freeze. So, think about our caveman ancestors that see a saber-toothed tiger or a wolf or a bear. If you've got to fight it, you've got to fight it. You're backed into a corner. If you can run away, that's a smarter move, right? That's a smarter move than trying to fight a saber-toothed tiger or a bear. But there's also the situation where it hasn't seen you, which can make you freeze, or it is going to maul you to death and you're going to die. And actually, really, really instinctively, there's a freeze response. There's a nice little video on YouTube of a duck next to a dog, and the duck is just pretending to be dead, right? And the duck hasn't got the intelligence to think, I'm going to pretend to be dead and fool the dog. This is like a hardwired evolutionary response to play dead, so that a predator or threatening animal is going to either stop seeing you as a threat or think, it's already dead, it's probably crawling with maggots, I'm going to leave it. And as soon as the dog goes away, this duck just gets up and runs. And like the freeze response, to be literally frozen with fear, to be like speechless with fear, is something that can happen to people. And, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman was saying that it would better to educate people about this